Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Nick and I'm back with another lockdown fly tying video, and today we'll be tying up a fun little pattern called the Wizard. I was exposed to the Wizard. I'd never even heard of it until about 2, 3 years ago. Had a couple of guys out in the boat fishing, and the guy in the bow had a few of these in his box and was fishing this all day and doing really well. And I had never seen the pattern before, never heard of it. He was a little more familiar with it, and he kind of told me a bit about it. And I went home and I tied up a dozen of them, and they fished really well for quite a while. I would just fish them periodically, and they pretty much always produced. But over time, I eventually lost those original ones that I had tied up, and kind of forgot about the pattern until I came across a picture in my phone of one I'd tied up a couple years ago, and it reminded me of it. So I've been tying some up here this morning, and gonna give this one a go. This pattern comes from I believe he lives on Vancouver Island up in British Columbia. A guy named Art Lindgren initially tied this. I've seen some pictures of his original, and the original that I was exposed to was definitely a little bit different in terms of hook and material. I believe the original is tied on a long shanked hook. It gives it just a little longer. I don't know. I guess the profile is about the same, but it definitely gives it a little different look. I don't have any long shank hooks to play with, and I don't really like long shank hooks, so I've just tied them this way. The original also calls for a little different material, but I'm just going kind of with what I have and what I feel like. This is kind of a fun one to play around with. You can do a bunch of different color combos. I've really stuck to this pink and chartreuse. That's the color that I was originally exposed to, and I just always kind of liked it, but it'd be a fun one to mess around with. So super cool little bait fishy pattern. Not much to it. It's real sparse. Just a nice small profile that just seems to produce. So it's definitely worth playing around with. So get started. I'll take this guy out, and I've got a Daiichi 2546 size 6 hook here that I'll tie this one on. I tie these pretty small. I know in the little bit that I've been able to research about Art Lindgren, he says that this was his most productive sea run cutthroat fly, as well as his most productive coho fly. So I'm guessing maybe he tied it in a little bigger sizes, or he just fished one size for all. But sounds like he did quite well on for coho up off Vancouver Island with this as well. I know the resident coho in the Sound definitely enjoy them. So to get started, I've got some Vivas 10-aught. I'm just using some white today. Just going to lay down a thread base here. Like I said, the materials that I'm using and the way I'm doing it is probably totally different than the original. Well, I know it's totally different than the original in terms of materials, but it's done this way does produce fish. I can attest to that. So start off for a tail. I'm using some bait fish emulator flats just because I like this fuchsia color. I've done this with Ripple Ice Fiber. I've done it with other bait fish emulator, any sort of anything really. I guess you could really go crazy with what you want to use for the tail, especially being that this isn't really a traditional bait fish profile or fly where the tail is really going to be moving a lot and it's going to be hanging out the back. I don't know, you'll see. So I'm just getting some of this fly ash, kind of picking out the short ones. This stuff's a little unruly when you first pull it off, but nothing too crazy. Then I'm just going to tie this in, and I don't want this to be overly long. The tail is going to be about the overall size of the fly, so maybe a hook, slightly more than a hook length. And I've messed around quite a bit with where I tie in this tail on the hook, just in terms of keeping the body nice and uniform, not getting a big bulky spot back here. Tying it in up forward works pretty well, but since it kind of gets covered up anyway, I'm not all that worried about it. Next up is going to be 2 colors of flat mini flat braid. Got fluorescent pink, and I'm also using a chartreuse of the same product. I'll tie the pink in first. Tie it in up here just to help with that, keeping the body a little bit more level. If I tie too much in at one spot, you end up with a big clump. So I tied the pinky in first just because I always wrap that one second. Now I'm tying in the chartreuse, same thing. The pictures that I've seen of the original wizards and the ones that I was originally exposed to had this sort of two-toned pink and chartreuse body. I'm not sure. It looked like it was a material that was just one material and of that color, the ones that I saw. So I'm not sure what it was, but I just do it this way. You could definitely just do one color. It's not like it really matters, but I just think it looks kind of cool. So what I do is I just wrap. I start with the chartreuse. With the chartreuse, I just wrap a body like I ordinarily would, like I was going to go with all one color, and then I'll come back and kind of rib it with the pink to give it that two-toned candied cane sort of thing going on. I wrap that up to about 2 hook eyes maybe. I'm going to try to tie everything else in up there. That'll be my area for my head when this is all done. Then I'm just going to take the pink and kind of wrap semi-even. Not perfect, but this is not a Atlantic salmon fly being tied for competition or something here. Got one fiber of this bait fish emulator that's being difficult, so I am removing it. Okay. The next step that I do is I get the belly going. For the belly, I'm actually using some polar bear, just because the original, I believe, calls for polar bear both in the belly and the wing, and I just happen to have some white polar bear that was given to me a couple years ago. I don't use it all that much, so it's kind of cool to use it now and then. With the polar bear, it's just like the bucktail. I'm just pulling it out, and it has a lot of under fur, a lot of short fibers. I'm not going very much, and you certainly don't have to use polar bear. Bucktail would work just fine for this. You could do anything synthetic even. I just been using the polar bear today because I have it and I don't use it very often. So if I'm really thinning this out. I don't want very much of this for the belly. Just looking to get some white in there. Again, this is a very sparse fly overall, so I definitely don't want to go crazy with the belly material. Really thin that out. Alright. So I mean, I've only got a dozen hairs or so, 12 or 15 hairs. I'll lay that out. I don't want that going all the way to the tail. This isn't really a traditional bait fish where you're going to get a great, everything's going to be profiled and tapered correctly, but I still like the belly to be shorter than the rest of the fly. So I'll get that tied right down. Pull those fibers down around the hook. Now I'm going to take some pearl ripple ice fiber, just a few strands. Don't need much of this at all. So I have less of this than I did of the polar bear for sure. Maybe 8 strands of this. Not trying to make this super flashy, just trying to get a little bit of sparkle in there is all. That's going to go right on top of the polar bear. I try to minimize my thread wraps at this point just to keep the head as slender and narrow as possible. Now we're going back to the bait fish emulator flash that we started with for the tail, and we're going to tie in a throat. The original has a pink throat. It's fun to just tie patterns where I just kind of do whatever the heck I want, which is probably 95% of my flies. But it's also fun once in a while to tie something that's where I'm following a recipe of sorts. So I've just got that thinned out. It's a little less than I have in there for the tail. And I'm just going to cut one side, leave it fairly long, and I'm just going to tie it in, and then I'll trim it. You only want this, well, like a 1/4 inch. It's just a okay. So now we've got the wing. For the wing, I'm using some mallard flank. This is dyed chartreuse, fluorescent chartreuse. I can't remember what the original calls for, but I have a lot of this mallard, so that's what's getting used. Now, I don't tie with a lot of this kind of feathers. I haven't in many, many years, so I might not at all be doing this the way I should be doing it, but it's fine. Basically, all I do is I kind of find a feather with the fibers that are long enough, and I just sort of pull them down one side and remove them from the stem, and then I'll take and use my fingers to kind of manipulate them to make sure they're semi even in length. They don't have to be perfect. So I want the wing. It's going to come down about 3/4 of the way ish. Again, no real right answer. And I just tie that in right on top. Now, like I said, there could easily be a better way of doing that. This is not my area of experience by any stretch. Kind of maneuver those around. Now I'm going with just a few strands of pink ripple ice fiber. The original, I believe, is tied with crystal flash. I like this really, really fine ripple ice fiber on this smaller fly. So I only have 8 strands here, maybe 10 strands. Again, not looking to make this super flashy. You could definitely use different colors of flash. You could use different types of flash. It's one of the ways you could play around with this, is really just go crazy with the colors. Next is going to be some Chartreuse Bucktail. Just gonna pick off a little clump of this. Again, I'm keeping this very, very sparse. I don't want this to be a big fly. So definitely not going crazy with the bucktail here. I want that maybe just slightly longer than the mallard. And that's just my personal preference. Again, all of this fly, since I have no real basis for learning about why it was designed and how and everything else, I'm just tying this the way that it has kind of worked for me with what I've always known and done. Then I'm going to finish that off with a little bit of ripple ice fiber in chartreuse. This package is just about empty. Holy cow. Same thing, not going with a ton of this. Put that in right down on top. And then that's going to be it on the materials. We're going to just clean this head up a little bit because we're going to put on some adhesive eyes and Just want to make sure that there's a nice area to attach those eyes. The head got a little bit fuller than I prefer, but it should be fine. Do a whip finish. Okay, now I'm going to go, I've got some 3mm adhesive eyes. I believe the original was tied with 1.5mm, so basically just little black dots almost. So I'm just going to take one of these eyes, position it where I think I want it. Do the same thing on this side. Alright, looks pretty good. I'm going to come in with some fine UV resin and just get some right between those eyes on top. Let that soak down in there. Really I'm not going for a lot of bulk on the head. I want to keep the head roughly the size that it is right now. Don't want it to build up and kind of take over the front end of this fly. Come on, soak in there. Okay, now I'm just going to flip it upside down, do the same thing between the eyes underneath. And those eyes will be good and secure on there. Sometimes getting those eyes to stick on the side and then get them lined up in the position you want is the hardest part about tying anything with this epoxy head, but with these small eyes on this small head, I find this one to be pretty easy to do. It's kind of the perfect size head. It almost just sort of forms itself if you don't go too crazy with the resin. Okay, now I'm just moving over to some thin UV resin. I just like to start with the super thin stuff to get those eyes on there, and then I just finish up with the thin. You could definitely just do either or with this size, no problem. And I'm just very sparsely going around this and sort of dabbing it with resin. I'm not, like I said, I'm not trying to build a big head. I just want everything coated and secured. As I'm going, I'm kind of just looking to make sure I don't end up with some goofy shape or something that's going to make it swim weird. Or, although sometimes that helps. I've had certain like surf candy style flies that swim like perfectly like little wounded bait fish because of some imperfection in the resin body. Alrighty, just gonna go over that with my finger, make sure I don't feel any like edges where the eye is not totally coated in resin and could potentially come off very easily. I don't, and that's it. Like I said, this one is different than the original. I did not create this pattern. This is just based on holding a fly in my hand and looking at a couple of old pictures. This is the copy that I came up with, and it's worked pretty well. Fun little pattern to tie, very productive. It's really one that's probably pretty overlooked. I know it is for me, even though those first dozen or whatever flies that I tied, we caught a lot of fish on them. Once I lost them, I really just kind of forgot about this pattern. You can see it's not going to be one that's going to give you like that traditional bait fish profile, but it's really small and sparse and slender, and fish just seem to pounce on it. So give this one a shot. Play around with different materials, different colors. Look up Art Lindgren if you're interested in learning more about it. Pretty cool pattern. So add a few to your box. If they work for you, love to hear about it. And thanks for watching.